Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar from a series of several webinars trying to demystify different parts of GeoticLog, mostly GeoticLog anyway. Different little features that you may not know exist, how to set up your database, and so on. Today's webinar is going to be mostly about data, different types of data, so mostly DDH, channels, outcrop, and drop points. So what are their characteristics, how they differ from each other's, and so on and so on. So this is going to be the topic for today. So my name is Eric Alahi. I'm the representative geologist at Geotic. So Geotic was founded about 15 years ago to try to computerize and also increase the quality of geological databases. And so we were one of the first company that did that on the market. Anyway, so let's start right away. So in GeoticLog, since version 8.0, we now have different types of data, okay, which in GeoticLog are called survey. Okay, so don't confuse those survey types with your downhole survey. I know in English it's very confusing. It's the same name, but when we're talking about survey type, we actually meant data type. Okay, so now, since version 8.0, every time you want to do a description, you have to select your project, and then you have to select your data type, so DDH, outcrop, channels, or drop points. And then, according to which type it is, you will have a drop-down list of what they are. Okay, so a lot of you are already familiar with the DDH, so just the drill holes. But we decided to incorporate more of these types because, for example, a lot of people were doing channels using GeoticLog, and all they were doing is they were doing an horizontal DDH. Well, it does work fine, but it does have some limitations to what you can do with a horizontal DDH. And so we just wanted to increase what you could do with these things. Okay. All right, let's start with these things. For example, when you go into the project tab, okay, again, you have to select which type of DDH you have, or which type of channel you have, and so on. Okay, so if you do end up with DDH, you will have your plan name, the status, your attribute, and so on. Okay. Well, if you change type, you won't get the same options in here. You don't have planned outcrop because you don't plan outcrops. And you don't have any planned channel. You don't have any attributes neither. So it's really just a name, and that's it. Okay. One other main difference between the two are that in all the options that you get at the bottom in here, okay, so in DDH, when you go in here, so you have the attributes, so obviously you don't get this tab if you're in different types of data, and then you have coordinates. In here, when you have DDH, you have planned, spotted, and if you have a drilled one, you have also the drilled coordinates. Okay, so you can have a series of coordinates to track down what happened, what was the original coordinate that was planned, what was spotted, and what is the actual DDH. Okay, well, if you change type, you don't necessarily have those same options. So let's say I'm taking channel. Channel works completely differently. Okay, so instead of having coordinates and downhole survey like you do in DDH, if I'm going back to DDH just for a second, so you have your coordinates, and then when you have a drilled one, you also have downhole survey where you can just say which type of test you've made and what is the azimuth and dib, and you can put them invalid if you wanted to. Okay, so that's how it works for DDH. But if you're in a channel, it works completely differently. Okay, so first of all, you don't have a coordinate tab in here. You only have a segment tab. So what this segment tab does is that you can actually separate your channel into different segments. And for each segment, you have to specify what is the coordinate at the beginning of the segment, what is the azimuth, what is the dip, and what is the length of your segment. And then it's going to orient it that segment. And if you press the little plus button, actually it's going to calculate the coordinate at the end of this last one, and put this one automatically as the beginning of your next segment. Okay, so if I was just modifying this one, for example, and if I was doing this, okay, so you have the from, so this is the beginning of your segment, and then you have the length, so it's not a from to, it's really just the length. Okay, so by default it's keeping the same length. So what happened in here is, if I have this beginning coordinate here, I go 2.08 meter into 0, direction and dip. Okay, it will calculate automatically what is the beginning of the next segment. Okay, which is this one. Okay, so if I'm looking back, it's completely different. So it does calculate itself doing this. However, maybe your channel has been broken down into smaller parts. Okay, and for example, if you have a mud hole, or if you have a crack or something, and then you have a discontinuous channel. Okay, I just made a quick drawing here. Let's say that your channel starts here, and for example, you have a mud hole in here, and then you just want to do a little offset in here for one of the segment, and then come back to where it was. Well, it is possible now to do this in GeoticLog, which was impossible if you had a drill hole before. Okay, so the way to do this is, instead of keeping this coordinate as being the one calculated automatically, I can just change the coordinate to that part in here for that point in here. Okay, so I can have it calculated, so if it's always like continuous, I can always do it, but if it's discontinuous, I can actually just change the coordinate, give it an azimuth and a dip and a length, and it's going to just offset that segment compared to the previous one. Okay. So you have, so this is fairly useful, but you have to be very careful, because if you recalculate your coordinates, it will probably recalculate this segment here according to the end of the other one. Okay, so if I'm doing this, okay, so now I've just changed it to 0.65, and I'm pressing calculate the coordinates. Well, it's going to come back to like if it was just a continuous channel. Okay, so you have to be very careful with this. So you don't want to recalculate your coordinates if you're doing some offset. Okay, just a warning sign here. It's quite important. Okay. So it does work with segment. Okay, a lot of people work differently. Okay, and if you do have a surveyor, maybe you want to import those data instead of putting them manually one by one like this. Okay, and it is somewhat different to import segment than it is to import downhole surveys in a drill hole. Okay, so we're going to go through this. Okay, so if you're in a drill hole, if you want to import your colors or your coordinates, you would either enter them manually in here, or you could also go into the import export button in here and just say, okay, I'm going to import coordinates. And if it's a drill hole, you would have to specify the type of coordinate that you would have. Is it drilled, planned, spotted, and so on. Okay, so you would fetch for your thing and just say where is your title line and where's your first data line, just assign the source and destination and it would work. Okay. And so you can import your things directly from here. And if you want to do your downhole survey, you would just go in here and import your downhole survey, fetch for your file, where is the title line, the first data line, specify in which project you're dealing with, and in which drill hole you're importing your downhole survey. And then you just specify the source, destination, and then you import. Okay, so that's the normal process for DDH. Well, if you're dealing with channel, it's somewhat different. Okay, first of all, you won't be entering your coordinate from this, and your segments are not going to be imported using the downhole survey. So that's why there's a new button called segments. Okay, so it does work similarly, but you have different options in here because, okay, first of all, you will go and fetch for your file. Okay, I'm not sure if I have one. I don't think I have one yet, but you select a file and then you just say which one is your data line, which one is your first data line, and then you just give your source and destination. But in this case, it's possible to import different things. Okay, so you can import your original, like the beginning of every segment, what is the coordinate and what is the length, the azimuth and dip. Okay, you can also import if you have the beginning and the end of the coordinate at the beginning of the segment and the coordinate at the end of the segment. It's possible to import that also, and it's going to calculate itself for azimuth and dip automatically. Okay, so this is why you have this place here called automatic calculation. So if you say calculate coordinate, that means you know the azimuth, dip, and length. If you say calculate azimuth, dip, and length, that means you know the coordinate at the beginning and at the end of each segment. Okay, so it's possible to import that also. So if you have a surveyor and just give you the from to of each segment, you can import this and it's going to recalculate itself into Geotic when you import. Okay, so this is one big distinction between DDH and channel. Okay. So it does allow you to have different types of data. So you can have discontinuous things. Well, if you were just doing a normal drill hole, horizontal drill hole to represent a channel, you couldn't do that. Okay, so that's one big important steps. Also, it just allows you to better organize your data. So just keep all the DDH in one place and all the channel into a different place, and so on. Okay. So a lot of people, what they were doing before is they were doing different projects. So one project was for DDH and the other one was for channel. But now you can keep them in one project, but have different types of data. All right. For the moment, I'm just talking about DDH and channel. You'll notice also that if you're taking a channel in here, okay, let's say I'm taking a channel. I don't have one in this project. I'm just going to take the other one. Okay, so you see that you have all those preset tables from Geotic when you get to channels. Okay, and that's because channel works a little bit the same. So they are intervals. Okay, so they are from twos to this. When you describe, you just put from twos. Okay, so in the case where you have this, let's say this goes from 1 to 2, and this is 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, let's say. It's possible to write down a lithology that goes from 0.5 to 1.5, and it's going to just be switched and just do your lithology in here and in here. Okay, so it's possible to have those kind of information in here. Or if you decide to have from 0 to 5, this is all basalt, for example. Well, you can just write 0 to 5, and it's going to color your segments all into basalt later on. Okay, so that's possible to do this. Because they're all interval tables, it's also possible to do the same kind of calculation. So you can do your average composites just like if they were drill holes. You could do your QA/QC exactly the same way. So you have your custom tables that are going to appear in here. So nothing really changes in that aspect for channels versus DDH. Okay, so for the description, it's mostly the same. Okay. If you take a different data type, let's say that we take drop point, you'll see that there's no table or almost no tables. There's no preset table because drop point works completely differently. So drop points are not interval tables. So they don't have from to. Okay, so a drop point is time related. Okay, so you have one coordinate and the grade can be changed over time. So you have one coordinate, but really you don't have any notions of distance or interval or depth or anything like this, right? So in this case, you have to build your own custom table to be able to use drop points. It's the same idea with the outcrops. Okay, so let's start with drop points. We'll talk about outcrops a little bit after. Okay, so if you go into the project tab in here and we have a look at the drop point. Okay. So when you go into coordinates, you really just get one coordinate. So it's just a fixed point. Okay. So no problem in here. Also, you'll notice that depending on your data type that you're choosing, in the information tab, you don't get exactly the same choices because it doesn't really make sense to have core size. For example, when you're talking about drop points or if you're talking about channels, so we remove them. Okay, so depending on what you have selected, you may have different options in here into information. Okay, so important to remember. So you have to create your own custom table, and when you create your custom table. Okay, let's go in here. So we just do a new. Okay, in the type here, if you want to have a drop point, you have to take something called survey monitoring. Okay, and these are the one that you will see when you select drop point as your data type. Okay, so you have survey monitoring. So it's all time related. So an example of this is this table I've created before. So you may have the date, you have a sample number, you have the heading, so you know where this mock or this thing is coming from, and then you have your gold value, and then you can just write down the geo that took the sample or something, right? And then description if you want to. Okay, so this is an example. And because there's no interval, it's impossible to do average composites in these tables. Okay, so you can do QA/QC if you want to, but you cannot do average composites. Okay, so these are different things that you have to think about. Okay. So basically, drop points is just something that is time related. So it could be just a drop point. So it means the grade can be changing over time, but it's always the same coordinate, basically. Okay. All right. If we're talking about Outcrop, Outcrop is quite interesting because now you can actually use geotic fields. Well, for each of these data type now you can use geotic field and link it directly to GeoticLog. But it's the same kind of idea. Okay, these tables really look like the one that were there, the preset tables, but actually they're not. Okay, these are all custom tables that I've made that are called exactly the same thing as the one that are into DDH, but these are all custom table. So if I'm going to lithology, for example, or alteration, okay, so you will see that it's not exactly the same. One thing you'll notice is that you have different columns. So one is called code. So these are unit codes for this alteration. So it could be A, B, C, D, or you can rename them. And then you have the other one that is the reference code, and that referencing to a different table, custom table that you have here. So when you build a custom table for Outcrop, you go into Edit, you make New, and then in the type, you just take Outcrop, okay? And then you can name this table, and then here you have something called reference table. So you can just pick another Outcrop table type, okay? And then you can reference to this table. Okay, so that's not too tricky, but it's just to make some cross-reference. Okay, so in this case, for example, you can have a table called lithology. Okay, let's take this one. Okay, and okay, let's say we are in that outcrop. Okay, and we're adding a column, so you can just call it code A, but like I mentioned, you can just change it for whatever you want. You can say this is 75% of my outcrop, and then you can link different dictionaries. So I don't know, they say, okay, you can just fill out your tables, okay, and when you're ready, you do this. Let's say that we're doing some samples on this outcrop. Okay, I can just say plus. This is the code for this sample. Okay, I can just say 1 if I wanted to. And the reference code in here, I can double click on it, and I will have the list of all the lithology because my table was referencing to the lithology table. Okay, so in this case, I only had one that was called A, so I can double click on A. So later on, I'll be able to see that this sample was taking on the lithology A, which is the day site in this case. Okay, so it's just possible to do some cross-referencing to know from where you took your sample or in which lithology was your alteration, mineralization, structure, and things like this. Okay, so this is possible to do. Another thing that is quite interesting is that you can also add columns with coordinates. Okay, so I've talked about this a little bit before in a different webinar, but let's say that I'm taking the sampling one or the grab. Okay, here. Sorry. You can just add. Whoops. Okay, let's just start again here. So grab. See, there's one column called coordinate. Automatically, it creates 3 different columns: one for X, one for Y, and one for Z. And your samples can actually have coordinates that are different than the ones given to your outcrop in here. Well, this is the drop point, but it's the same idea for outcrop. Okay, so you give a coordinate here for the central point of your outcrop, but when you're describing, you can actually give different coordinates to your sampling and to your samples. And so later on, when you display this in Geotic Mind, for example, or elsewhere, you can just draw them exactly where they're located. Okay, and this you can do to any of these tables. Okay, again, QAQC, you cannot do average composites because there's no intervals, there's nothing you can do in here. Okay, but anyway, so just remember that you can do some cross-reference between different things, and then you can just apply different coordinates to the different tabs that can be different than the one into your coordinate table in the project. So there's different ways of setting up your things. Some people actually decided, okay, I'm just going to create one line. I'm just going to create a table called Outcrop, for example, and on this line I'm going to put the lithology table, my mineralization, my angles, and everything going to be into one, and just create different outcrops for everything. I don't really suggest doing this because if you end up having different samples or several samples for one outcrop, then you'll have to create different columns every time to add different samples, which is not very practical. Okay, and also it's very difficult to know how much of a lithology is there and so on. So I would definitely prefer, and I would suggest you to, instead of doing one table with everything in it, I would just recreate all my tabs in custom tables, and then just describe my outcrops differently, and then do cross-reference into your different tables for your coordinates and so on. Okay. When I mentioned that you can change the code, so in here, like I can change it and say, okay, this is actually V1D. Okay, so I can actually rewrite the same thing as the code litho, and then if I'm going to my sampling, now it kept the same thing for reference code, but if I erase it, whoops, okay, if I erase it, now I can see the new code is in here, so I can change it. Okay, so it's possible to change them, and then you will know right away that this sample is referencing to that type of lithology, for example. Okay, so this is the best way of doing this. Okay. Other things that you need to know about the different types of data is that has changed in GeoticLog is that when you go into the printing section, okay, now you have to select which type of data you have before printing. Okay, so for example, if you go into this little filter, by default it's DDH, but you can print reports for outcrop, for channels, for drop points. Okay, they're all in the each or other in here, and so on. And for each of these data type, you'll have to make a different template. Okay, and the reason being because they have different types of data. Okay, so if I'm an outcrop, I don't have a from to, so I cannot build the same kind of table and same kind of report as if I had a drill hole, because I don't have from tos if I have an outcrop and things like this. Okay, so you have to build profiles for each of your survey type. Okay, so that's something to remember. Also, like I mentioned, your information tab, the things are all different, okay, depending on your type that you have. One important point for the moment, this will change in the future, but for the moment, GeoticGraph only accept DDH. You cannot put your channel, you cannot put your drop points, and you cannot put your outcrops into GeoticGraph for now. This will change in the future. We're rethinking about the GeoticGraph and GeoticCAD right now, and it's going to be included at that point. But for now, it's not possible. However, in GeoticMine, you have no problem displaying all of these data if you wanted to. Okay. Just a little trick, just to let you know, if you have only GeoticGraph, you won't be able to display those different types of data. Okay. For the moment, it's going to change, but for the moment, it's impossible. Okay, and just a quick glimpse at Geotic Field. So Geotic Field was built mostly to have people go on in the field and collect data and connect it directly to GeoticLog, and so you can build forms that are actually based on your different tabs or different tables that you've created, your custom tables that you have created. So you can create as many different forms as you want. So I've created one for outcrop, one for channel, but you can actually even log in Geotic Field if you wanted to. Okay, these are just custom forms, and then when you modify them, it's possible to actually decide what you want to include in your form, and then once you have this, it's also possible to know how to build how you want to display your different parts in your forms and things like this, and so on. Okay, so let's just take one of these forms and just show you how it looks like. So for example, the one for outcrop that I've created looks like this. So you select your project, okay, and these are made for tablets or for Windows tablets for the moment, and so normally it's mostly touch screen, so all the menus are a little bit different. Now I'm just doing it on a computer, but you know, it's going to be similar. Okay, so you have the different pages in here. So lithology, alteration, blah blah blah. These are all my custom tables. When you're building your forms, it's possible to change the size of each of these little things and you're allowed to 3 different rows of data. And so it's possible to say in which row what do you want to be what needs to be displayed and so on. And then it's just a normal form, and then okay, you just select your different data in here, and you're good to go. And then once it's done, you just connect it to GeoticLog, and all your data are in the same place, basically. Okay, so the idea was to regroup all the different types of data into one database, so you're not fetching for information in one database and then the other one in the other one. So you want to integrate all your knowledge into one spot and be able to display those things and do a better interpretation and better understanding of your deposit or your findings, right? So that was the idea in here. Okay, in the future, Geotic Field is going to be improved. You will be able to have maps and different things in here. For example, you will be able to draw little things in there. It's going to be customized also to go underground to do mapping, underground mappings, and things like this directly on the tablet, and you will be able to import that into your database. And for example, in Geotic Mine, you will be able to see your drawing, georeference in 3D and things like this. Okay, so this is where we are right now, and that's what we're developing. Okay, for example, in Geotic Field also, you can just use your tablet GPS to go and tell you what is your X, Y, and Z when you're in the field using this little button and so on. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here for today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. We're going to be here to answer different questions. But that's it for me. The goal was to just teach you a little bit about the difference between the different types of data and how they're set up into GeoticLog. All right.